She was the kind of face audiences didn't forget. On stage or on screen, Francesca Annis carried a presence that felt almost otherworldly, poised, enigmatic, effortlessly commanding every frame she appeared in. For decades, she was a fixture of British cinema and television, a woman whose elegance and style made her unmistakable in roles that ranged from haunted heroines to powerful matriarchs. Her performance in Dune left an imprint that never faded, and her classical work only affirmed what critics long believed. She was one of the most formidable talents of her generation. But behind the familiar image lay a truth the public never fully understood. At the height of her career, when fame should have wrapped around her like an unbreakable crown, she quietly stepped away. No announcement, no farewell, just a vanishing act that left more questions than answers. What makes someone with such brilliance walk away from everything she once built? And what happened when the lights finally went out? Before her disappearance from the spotlight became a whispered mystery, Francesca Annis was a woman whose career seemed carved from the very foundations of British theatre and film. Born into a world that valued restraint and refinement, she inherited a discipline that would later shape her unmistakable screen presence. Audiences first discovered her in the late 1960 seconds, but it wasn't until the following decades that her name became synonymous with a uniquely British form of elegance, intense, controlled, and quietly magnetic. Her portrayal of Lady Jessica in Dune introduced her to an entirely new global audience. She didn't simply act the role. She embodied it with a measure of intelligence and quiet authority that made the character unforgettable. Critics praised her ability to shift from classical Shakespearean tragedy to modern television drama with the same fluid precision. She moved through the entertainment world as if destiny itself had written her path. Celebrated on stage, admired on screen, and respected by colleagues who spoke of her as an actress who elevated every project she touched. Yet even as headlines celebrated her talent and producers sought to secure her name on their next major production, something beneath the surface was beginning to fracture. Fame had given her a place in the cultural memory of an entire generation, but behind the applause, a quieter struggle was already unfolding. Long before her name appeared in the credits of major films, Francesca Annis grew up in a world marked by movement, transition, and an early understanding that nothing in life stayed still for long. Raised partly in Brazil before returning to England, she absorbed a blend of cultures that shaped her artistic instincts, discipline from dance training, emotional intelligence from theater, and a sharp awareness of how people watched, judged, and adored those who stepped into the light. Acting was never a sudden choice for her. It was a slow awakening, a path that formed itself in front of her long before she could articulate why it felt inevitable. Her early years in the industry were far from effortless. She faced the same doubts that haunt every young performer, whether she belonged, whether her voice was strong enough, whether she could carry the weight of roles that demanded more than simple talent. But there was something in her that directors recognized immediately, a quiet intensity, a kind of emotional steadiness that allowed her to disappear into characters without losing herself. She moved through auditions with a grace that made her stand out, even when she was surrounded by louder, more forceful personalities. The moment everything shifted came when she began landing roles that required depth rather than charm. Her work in classical theater became the turning point, revealing an actress who could merge fragility with strength in ways audiences found deeply human. By the time she reached her breakthrough roles, it was clear that Francesca Annis wasn't simply becoming famous, she was becoming inevitable. Every step toward the spotlight felt like a natural consequence of someone who had spent her entire life preparing, consciously or not, to be seen. Fame rarely asks for permission before it begins to take. For Francesca Annis, the ascent that once felt exhilarating gradually revealed its hidden toll, one that was measured not in awards or applause, but in the quiet erosion of her personal world. As her career expanded, so did the expectations placed upon her. Directors sought her precision, audiences admired her restraint, and the industry depended on the consistency she brought to every role. But with each success came a tightening of boundaries around her life, leaving her with less space to be anything other than the woman the public believed her to be. Her commitment to the craft demanded sacrifices, long stretches away from home, the constant pressure to remain composed, and a level of scrutiny that left little room for vulnerability. And when her relationship with Paul McGann became the center of an unexpected media storm, the line between her private self and her public identity disintegrated. What had been a deeply personal connection suddenly turned into a headline, followed by criticism that painted her as the catalyst of a fractured marriage. The intrusion was relentless, and no amount of professionalism could shield her from the emotional weight it carried. While Hollywood continued to extend opportunities roles that could have launched her into a different tier of global stardom, she refused them. Not because she lacked ambition, but because she understood the cost. The industry demanded visibility, and visibility demanded surrender. She had already given too much. The woman who once navigated fame with precision now found herself withdrawing, protecting whatever pieces of her life remained untouched. In choosing privacy over expansion, she made a decision that few understood at the time. She valued herself more than the world that wanted to claim her. The decline of Francesca Annis's public presence was not marked by a single moment, no dramatic announcement, no final role that signaled an ending. Instead, it unfolded slowly, so quietly that many didn't notice it was happening until she was already gone from the screens she once commanded. After the media uproar surrounding her relationship with Paul McGann, the tone of her professional life changed. Scripts still arrived, offers continued to find her, but she accepted fewer and fewer of them. What she had once approached with passion now carried a heaviness she could no longer ignore. There were subtle signs that her relationship with the industry had altered. She became increasingly selective, turning down projects that would have kept her in the public eye. Those close to her described a woman who seemed exhausted not by the work itself, but by the world that came with it. Fame had transformed from a platform into a burden, and the spotlight, once warm and inviting, had become an interrogation lamp she longed to escape. Interviews grew sparse, public events even rarer, and the confident presence that once filled theaters seemed to retreat into a shell built from silence and self-preservation. As the years passed, her absence became more pronounced. Roles that might have been hers went to others. Younger generations of viewers grew up without knowing her name. The industry, always hungry for the next face, moved forward without her, and she let it. Whether it was disillusionment, emotional fatigue, or a quiet decision to reclaim her life, only she knows. What remains undeniable is that there came a moment when Francesca Annis, with all her talent and legacy, simply stepped out of the light and did not return. For someone who had once lived in the rhythm of scripts, cameras, and rehearsals, Francesca Annis's quiet retreat from public life felt almost surreal. She did not frame it as a farewell, nor did she seek to clarify the reasons behind her withdrawal. Instead, she allowed the world to adjust to her absence. In an industry where every exit is usually marked by statements, tributes, or controversy, her silence became its own kind of declaration, measured, deliberate, and deeply personal. In the years that followed, she appeared only sporadically, choosing roles that were small, intimate, and far removed from the intensity that had once defined her career. These appearances felt less like attempts to return and more like gestures of affection toward the craft she had never stopped respecting. But they were rare, almost fleeting. The woman who once carried entire productions with her presence now seemed content to exist at the margins, where no cameras pressed in too closely and no expectations weighed on her shoulders. Her life beyond acting became something she guarded fiercely. She focused on her family, on quiet routines, and on a sense of normalcy she had not been afforded in her earlier years. Those who encountered her described a person who appeared peaceful, grounded, and uninterested in revisiting the stage from which she had voluntarily stepped down. The absence of spectacle around her later years is perhaps the clearest evidence of her final choice. She preferred a life unobserved, one where she owed nothing to the narratives others wished to impose. Her last curtain call was not a bow, but simply a turning away, a choice to live for herself, rather than the audience that once knew her name. What remains of Francesca Annis is not a legacy defined by constant visibility, but one shaped by the resonance of her work and the quiet power of her choices. Her performances, sharp, elegant, and deeply felt, continue to echo in the memories of those who witnessed them. Viewers who revisit Dune, Macbeth, or her many acclaimed television roles still speak of the unmistakable presence she brought to each character. She never chased celebrity. Instead, she built a body of work that spoke with more authority than any headline ever could. Among colleagues and directors, she is remembered as a performer of rare discipline, a woman who arrived prepared, who listened more than she spoke, and who carried the emotional truth of her roles with an honesty that made her unforgettable. Even as younger audiences may not recognize her name immediately, they often discover her through the projects that quietly endure, finding in her performances a depth that feels strikingly contemporary. Her long absence from the public eye has created a paradoxical kind of immortality. The industry may have moved forward, but her silence has given her an almost mythical status, an actress who chose her own ending rather than letting fame choose it for her. Instead of fading away, she became a symbol of autonomy in a world that rarely grants it. What remains is not just the memory of a remarkable performer, but the imprint of a woman who understood that legacy is not measured by how long one stays in the light, but by the truth one leaves behind. Fame is often imagined as a destination, a shining peak reached only by the chosen few. But the story of Francesca Annis reminds us that what glitters under the spotlight can also cast the deepest shadows. She was a woman who mastered her craft, captivated audiences, and built a career defined by grace and precision. Yet she also understood the invisible weight that came with being watched, judged, and dissected by a world that rarely paused to consider the person behind the performance. Her quiet departure from the public eye invites us to reflect on what it truly means to step away. Was it an act of preservation, a reclaiming of self, or simply a desire for a life unshaped by expectation? Whatever the answer, her story lingers, a reminder that brilliance does not need to burn forever to be remembered. Sometimes the most powerful legacy comes from choosing silence over spectacle. As you think about her journey, her triumphs, her struggles, and her decision to walk away, what stays with you the most? Do you remember her for the roles that defined her, or for the courage it took to leave them behind? If she were standing in front of you today, what would you say to her? If this story resonates with you, I invite you to share your thoughts, leave a comment, or explore more untold stories like this one. Fame and shadows, every star has its story.